Hello there, welcome to Inkquiring Minds. My name is Doug and I'm back with another Pen Resurrection Sunday video. Today I'm going to restore one of these two Waterman fountain pens. They're both made in Canada in the 1940s. These pens were never dated, so it's really difficult to tell, but this is the era for these two pens. They're almost identical. The main difference is that the Waterman Stalwart and Dauntless are largely the same pen, but their names can differ depending on the country of production. A Stalwart is typically a two-band gold-trimmed US model or a two-band Canadian model, while the Dauntless is a single-banded chrome-trimmed model made in Canada. However, some sources indicate the Dauntless was a separate lower-priced model also made in Canada. Well, they're both made in Canada, and so I'm going to call this one a Dauntless, and I'm going to call this one a Stalwart. There is also a smaller version of this made in Canada called the Starlet. I've restored one of those before. Now, which one should I pick? Which one should I restore today? Well, I think I've decided that I'm going to do this one, mainly because the nib on the Dauntless has a tine snapped off. See it right there? So one of those tines is gone, so that means that this nib, 14 karat gold nib, is going to be a stub of some form or another. Successful or not, I don't know. We'll see. But this one actually has a nib intact. It has a slight bit of a bend to it, but I've test written with it, and it actually writes very nicely. So I might not have to straighten that nib out. It might just write beautifully the way it is. So let's take a look at this Waterman's Stalwart made in Canada in the early 1940s. Overall, it is a medium-sized pen, and it is just about 5 inches long when it's capped. It is made of this glorious gray pearl striated celluloid and has gold trim. Let's see what damage needs to be repaired. Sometimes these Waterman celluloid pens with their riveted in clips can break, that can crack, they can fall off, they can break right there, and it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to restore that. This clip seems to be in pretty good shape. Lots of wear and scratching, and it says Waterman's down the center, if you can call that center, slightly off center. Okay, someone was having a bad day at the Waterman's plant in Saint-Lambert, Quebec in the 1940s. Just did that punch or did that engraving slightly offset. So lots of wear and scratching and so forth, but these clips were gold filled and should have a good amount of resilience to them and should polish up fairly nicely. The two cap bands are tarnished, but should be able to polish up nicely, and they don't spin at all. So that means the celluloid hasn't shrunk so much. There's typical fine wear and scratches all over the cap and all over the barrel, especially where the barrel meets the cap. Lots of rings of wear, some scratch marks, and there's a nice gouge right there. But that should polish up very nicely. No cracks in the bottom of the barrel. And the section is in good shape. I don't see any nicks or scratches, unlike the Dauntless, which had some real gouges out of the ebonite section. There's the ebonite feed, and there's the 14 karat gold nib, all tarnished, and it says Waterman's Ideal 14K Canada. And down there it says 2. So this is the number 2 size 14 karat gold Waterman nib. Now you give the section a twist, and I've done this already, and I didn't have to apply any heat to it to get it out of the section. Sometimes it's shellacked shut and so tight that it won't come out, but this one's coming out. And there's the remnants of the old latex sack right there, and the rest of it remains inside the barrel. And see if the lever works now. It's solid. So this, because look how solid that is. It looks like it was left with ink in it and just all dried up. So I'll have to dig all that out. But the first thing I want to do is put all of this in a bath of a pen flush, which is 9 parts distilled water and 1 part ammonia, in an electrosonic bath, and clean all these parts up. Let's look at the imprints before we go. The cap has Waterman's made in Canada on it, and the barrel has an imprint. Where is it? There it is. Hard to see against that gray. See if we can get an angle on it there. That might be more visible. It says Waterman's. Yeah, all it says is Waterman's made in Canada. So into the pen flush ultrasonic bath all these parts go, and we'll come back and see whether we can knock that feed and nib out and get a look at the nib. And here is the mess of a old sack I took out of the barrel, and the whole thing is in pen flush in the ultrasonic bath right now, and then we'll take a look at it after all this guck has been removed. And here's the section feed and nib out of the bath, looking pretty good. I've scraped off all the old remaining sack there and scraped some of that shellac off of there as well. I'll probably sand that down to pure ebonite at some point as well, but let's see if we can knock that feed out of there. Get our block and our rod out and see what we can do. Well, that's coming out easy. Feed came out, the nib stayed. There we go. And there's our nib. We'll put it on this side of the screen. You can put it on the other side of the screen over here when it's all polished up. Turn it around. See all the old ink stains and everything? That should come up beautifully. And there's the feed. And the underside of that feed, I'll polish that up. Maybe sand it. There's a few imperfections along there. I might sand that down a little bit first and then polish it with some micro mesh, and then with some polishing compound on my Dremel tool. And the section looks like it's in pretty good shape as well. Put it over here, and you can see there's just minor wear and a little bit of oxidation. That should polish up nicely. And there's the Waterman's nib, all polished up. You can see it says Canada 2A on the bottom. Let's turn it over, and there's the bottom, all polished up. And it's looking very nice indeed. And there's the section all polished up. Beautiful. Ebonite shines up so beautifully. And the feed is just phenomenal. Look at that. Looks like ebony, doesn't it? Okay, now I have the section, the feed, and the nib all ready to go back in the pen. And I'm going to put it back in without putting the sack on, because we're going to dip test that nib to see if it needs anything before I actually repair the sack and seal the pen. I went ahead and sanded down the stem part of the feed, that ebonite, to make it a little bit slippery with ebonite dust to help it go into the pen. And I'll line up the nib on the feed as best as we can, like that. There's a little sort of a dish type shape right inside the nib, on the underside of the nib there, that feed sort of lines up with. I'm going to try to squeeze it right there with a rubber mat, top and bottom. I always do this. Put the section in first, give it a little bit more leverage, and then we try to find the sweet spot. This is actually going to go in fairly nicely. Can feel that sweet spot very nicely. I'm going to give it a shove and then take a look. Actually, that's a little bit further out than I expected. Let's see if I can pull it out a little bit. There we go. Right there. Get my fingerprints off the nib. Check its alignment. Looks pretty good. It's just about where it was, 2A, and put it back in the pen. Now that might slip around a little bit. That's going to need to be shellac shut, but that'll give me enough leverage there to try out that nib. Get out some Waterman's Serenity Blue and just dip the tip into the ink and see what we have. 1940s Waterman Stalwart, and that is a very flexible nib. And it's very smooth with a good amount of feedback. Very wet. I would say this is a fine line, but it's giving me thin lines horizontally and thicker lines vertically. I would say that line is 0.05 millimeters, where that line is probably 0.3 millimeters in thickness. But I don't think there's anything I need to do that nib right away. So we'll just leave that in there and put that nib assembly aside, and we'll go at the cap and the barrel and polish out all those scratches. I'm going to go at the deeper scratches where I find them with some 400 grit first, and I'm going to mask those cap bands with some masking tape until I get up to the 4,000 range of grit of micro mesh. After I've gotten out the scratches and gouges with the 400 grit, I'll go through the micro mesh from 1,500 through 12,000 and then finish up with some polishing compound on my buffer wheel. and we'll see how it turns out. Let's move this aside and take a look at the cap first, and have the cap on this side. We'll turn it around so you can see what it looks like. It's relatively dull. And then we'll put the barrel up here and turn it around and show what the barrel looks like before, and we'll put the after polish down below. And here's the cap all polished up, beautiful and shiny. I love that gray striated celluloid. The clip came up very, very nicely. You worry sometimes that it might be thinly plated, but that's gold filled. And the cap bands came up very nicely as well. Now let's look at the barrel. The barrel down here, and that lever is nice and shiny gold, and no scratches whatsoever, polished up top and bottom, and the imprint is still legible. There we go. Now all we have to do is put a new sack on that section and put the pen back together again. So now we're going to put a new sack on this section here. I've got a number 16 size sack, latex, some talc, my shellacker pen, and my sack spreader. First we have to figure out how much to trim that sack by, and it looks like when the section goes in the pen, that sack is going to come up to the bottom of those threads. And it's slightly outside the barrel, so we recreate that and pinch it right there and give it a trim. And now let's test fit that. See whether it works. It looks like it's going to work nicely. Yep, that's going to be perfect. So let's do it for real now. Get our shellac pen out. Dial up a little bit of shellac and just all the way around the nipple on that section. Put the sack spreader back on and just go up underneath that lip. And give it a slight turn. There we go. Spread that shellac out. And I like to put just a stripe of shellac around that seam just to make sure there are no leaks. And we let that dry for several hours. Then we can put it back in the pen and test our ink capacity. And then I'll do a writing sample. We'll make sure that the nib is fine, and then I'll shellac that section down because it does spin a little bit on that section. Okay, that shellac is dried. And now we're ready to put the section of nib back in the barrel. We're going to talc up the latex sack so it doesn't twist inside. There we go. And we're going to line up the lever with the top of the nib, and we're just going to push it straight in. There. It's a fairly loose fit when it's not shellacked. There's a little bit of shellac on there right now, so it's actually stabilizing a bit. So I might not add any more shellac. I might just heat that a little bit to bond the shellac with the section when I'm done. But right now, I need a little bit of a twist just to line it up here. So once I'm done with this pen, I'll heat that up a little bit, and that'll bond that shellac in the section that's already painted over that seam. So let's measure the weight of this pen, and it weighs 8.8 grams. We press tear, and then we get out our Watermans, give our sack a squeeze, do it a couple of 3 times. I'm not hearing any more bubbles. And put it back on the scale, and we see 1.2 milliliters of ink, which is pretty typical for a number 16 size sack in a medium pen. So I got out my pad from Dominant Industries, which gives me line widths. And indeed, that is a 0.3 millimeter line on the horizontal. The verticals are 0.6, however, millimeters. And that's because that nib is so soft that any tiny amount of pressure you put on that nib gives you a fairly thick line. And it's very smooth. I did a little bit of nib tine adjusting just to make sure that they were completely aligned, and then see whether I needed to run any micromesh on this, and I don't. And this is extremely wet, very smooth. Hesitate to call it a flex nib, but it certainly is flexible. You can see the bounce that I'm getting out of that nib. And I'd say that is a complete restoration. Very successful. And I'll be back with my thoughts about this resurrection. I'm just going to give it some heat here to liquefy some of that shellac that's over painted on that section. and will hold this section in place because it's still moving. If I want to turn it, I can turn it. By heating it, that'll melt that shellac and then solidify. A little bit of heat, gonna shoot it with some compressed air. That'll cool it down, and it doesn't turn anymore. Excellent. So what are my thoughts about this pen resurrection? Well, this Waterman Stalwart is just gorgeous now. All that wear is gone. The celluloid is looking beautiful, and the hardware came up even better than I expected. Look at that clip. Relatively peculiar offset. You can call it unique offset on that Waterman's, not exactly center. And the best part about this resurrection, I think, was discovering this very flexible, bouncy 14 karat gold vintage nib. Just writes like glass and very expressive. And the other nice thing about these Waterman Stalwarts and Dauntless fountain pens, they were relatively inexpensive in the day, in the 1940s, early 1940s. So they weren't high-end pens at all. They are gorgeous to look at and to write with. But as vintage pens, they're relatively easy to resurrect. Just took some polishing on here. There was nothing really complicated or difficult, like Parker Vacuumatics, for example. Just put a new latex sack in the barrel, and you're good to go for another half century. These sections are fairly simple. They're usually shellacked on, so a little bit of heat, and you get that out of there. Latex sacks are relatively inexpensive to purchase, and even if you haven't got specialized tools like this sack spreader, you can use a paper clip to do that sack spreading on your resurrection of your lever-filled fountain pens. So if you're interested in restoring pens or getting into restoring old pens, these are relatively inexpensive to purchase on eBay. Find one that needs some restoration, that has a nib on it that isn't completely damaged, and might just need a sack. You can find these at local antique shops now and then, and especially if they only just need a latex sack replacement, they can be a really nice project for someone who's interested in getting started and doing fountain pen repair. Certainly that's where I started. My friend Jack helped me out with giving me this sack spreader and giving me some information on where to pick up supplies and so forth. And this video should give you the basic instructions on how to restore one of these fountain pens. If that's not for you, but you just want a pen that's been restored by me, I'm selling it for $150 US plus shipping. All you have to do is email me at inkquiringminds@gmail.com with your name and your address, and I'll get you a shipping quote and instructions on how to pay my PayPal. And there you have it. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that bell to get instant notifications whenever a new video is posted. And you can join as a member of my channel for only 99 cents a month, and I guarantee I'll answer your comments in the comment section, and you'll get cool emojis, badges, sneak peek unboxing videos, as well as instant access to my videos the moment I post them. And that just leaves it for me to say, thank you. For watching. And that's all she wrote.
I made this.